Uh, okay, everyone. So, we'll start the second half of the class. All right. So let's talk about the Black resistance during the transatlantic enslavement. So, I lifted this from the Bell's paper that kind of draws our attention to the fact that Black resistance, especially during the transatlantic slave period, um, it's actually something that these enslaved individuals actually started resisting right from during the Middle Passage up to getting to the Americas, and then some of them, some of the data shows that about 15% of people during passed on during the Middle Passage. The Middle Passage is went from the capture to their transportation to this um to the destination, which may be the America, what was called Upper Canada, or even some persons were also sent to Europe for some of these enslaved individuals. So, and the up to that, from that point of their capture to when they found themselves in the destinations where they were sold eventually, there have been different acts of resistance. People have resisted in different ways. So that's but very it's quite striking, but while they try to resist, then the slaveholders themselves also had ways to control them, ways to bring them back to line, ways to bring them to obey, to do the work because they were seen as commodities, they were seen as properties. So they were saying that, oh, this is my property. It's supposed to yield profit for me. And that's how they were seen. They were dehumanized and not seen as humans. They were seen as mere commodities and properties. So part of the ways, some of the ways they used to punish the dissident ones, the recalcitrant ones, included there were obviously there were some laws for sure, some legal codes that were used to like empowered the slaveholders or slave owners to do with the property which they owned in any way that they deemed fit. That's one quite interesting. One of the papers talked about Lewis, who wrote a letter to the former slave owner after escaping. And that was an interesting letter to read. When I read it, I was like, "Jeez, this is funny." Yeah, you can see some of the uh, contradictions, talking about experiencing being maltreated even by the ladies in the house, and yet praising the mistress of the house, which it was ironical, or should I call it a paradox? So basically, that means there were some ill treatments, there were ways that were used to rein them in, or to punish them, or to bring them back to their control. Some of the approaches included some of them were arrested, some were taken to court, and some were sentenced to prison. And eventually, some were even whipped in public, some were branded. Some of the slave owners, when they buy the slave, they have their branding where I've seen some videos where they use hot iron to brand with their, what should I call it, logo or signal to brand their slaves that they own. And then were also placed in stocks, like the picture shows. And then some were hung or murdered eventually. So that's part of the experiences that some of these enslaved individuals, our ancestors, experienced in because at that point they were not seen as humans, but they were seen as mere commodities. But nevertheless, it didn't deter them, they still resisted in different ways. And that's why we initially talked about different ways of resisting. Or we still touch on that again, which include what Cooper described as individual acts of resistance and the collective act of resistance. The individual acts of resistance are commonly the everyday resistance approaches. And however, the other approach is termed as the collective acts of resistance, which was more radical, which was more organized, which was more overt. And some individual acts of resistance were for sure, maybe violent for sure, but the more organized ones, which is the collective ones, had more widespread implications and or also had more long-term implications as we want to understand. But one of the interesting things I also saw from the paper is about how this individual acts of resistance, how little and how incremental they may be, nonetheless, they were still they built up into the more collective acts of resistance. This kind of sets the foundation for collective activities, for collective resistance, and for radical change. Yeah, some of the collective acts of resistance may be quelled with violence. Maybe some were shot, some were hung, some were arrested, some were imprisoned. When in the case where they were able to quell them, but still, those who were successful were able to overpower and gain control. I remember the example of Haiti, which was how they were able to organize and chase away the French colonial powers who were the French masters, from masters to colonial powers, anyhow we want to term it. But eventually they were able to do that. But some would argue that Haiti still suffers from that to date, that the curse of Haiti, as some we want to call it, has its roots from that insurrection, that revolt, or trying to revolt against the French. That they even after revolting, they were then the French colonial masters eventually said that they will pay them for their freedom. Someone you are just got free from someone and you have to pay the person. The same thing applies to the individual Lewis that I talked about also in the same paper. That he on himself on his own also wanted to get his freedom. Yeah, he escaped, but even after escaping, he still wrote a letter promising to, or should I say, trying to offer to pay for his freedom. This is someone that was already free, but he still wanted to pay for his freedom. Wanted to pay $10 in the first year, $16 in subsequent years, and talked about who he trusted that the payment could be made through him as the conduit for the payment. That was the mayor of the town or the city. So eventually, we understand that the acts of resistance, there are different ways that individuals have tried to resist by themselves. And there are also the collective actions where people organized and then resisted. So, but before I go further, I just wanted to get your ability to sort these into individual and collective acts of resistance. So, which of them, starting from arson, which category does arson fall under? Collective. Okay.
However, can be individual cases.
Yes, it's here, but
but like as a whole.
yeah, arson, yeah, often collective, yeah.
Sorry,
Oh, Kemi, I didn't see that. Sorry. Do you want to say something? Please go and say, Kemi.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what you were saying about a slave who had already escaped the master trying to buy his freedom. From some of the books that I have read or the movies, these people were willing to buy their freedom because even if you escaped from your master and you were caught, you were still a slave and you were not technically free. So I think why they were wanting to pay for their freedom is to ensure that if they were caught later on, they were not taken back to their masters as slaves because they had already bought their freedom. I think that's the reasoning for that. I just wanted
Yeah,
to comment.
yeah. Thank you very much. And you can also remember that the paper also makes several arguments about why he could have wanted to pay himself. One is either an act of mischief. That was one of the arguments. And one is also about what you just said about the fear that if they get caught, or if he was caught, that maybe he would be sent back. That's part of the fear. But there was also another part that yeah, it could be because he had that sense of that's he has been he have adopted that sense that no, he has this obligation. So it has been built into him as into his mentality, into his psyche. So that's another aspect of it. Yeah, there's that lens that it could be just be an act of mischief. Another one is that it could be because he was afraid that he could be caught, he might be caught and then sent back, or maybe enslaved and probably get punished. And then the third one was about that orientation that has been developed over time. That's feeling that yeah, I need to buy myself off, despite being far away from Upper Canada, which in this case it was in the United States. So that's three scenario for sure. Although these were just guesswork speculations. Not even the author did not know what the truth is, but you're just trying to hazard some guesses. Yeah, but the points are valid. It's just that we don't know which one is the actual truth. I don't know if you got that.
Yes, I did. Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. And then, where would we categorize the temporal marronage? That's the French word marronage.
Can't remember what that was.
It's from escape, temporary escaping.
That was
Yeah.
collective.
Collective.
Well, escaping was considered collective.
Okay. Okay. You want to say something else?
It was individual, I think.
Yeah, it was individual. Yeah, it was individual. Yeah, yeah. The permanent marronage was collective. Yeah, but the temporal was categorized as individual.
Oh,
Yeah.
there's two temporary. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then the next work stoppage.
Collective.
Okay, you think it's collective? Why do you think it's collective? I think that I should be asking that part, not just about why do you think work stoppage would be collective? Let's try to think and rationalize.
Together, almost like a strike, like how workers unions do, like everybody does it at once. That's like a collective work.
So it would be a revolt or even armed rebellion.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not armed for sure. Let's say kind of a revolt because revolution may not be violent revolution. Yeah, yeah. But work stoppage in this case was categorized as individual act.
Well, I was gonna say that. I was like explaining both.
Yeah. And then revolt. Okay, we've already talked about revolt. Revolt was categorized as collective.
Collective.
Yeah. The next one is destruction of livestock. Individual. Why do you think it should be individual? I think let's think. Let's talk about it. Okay, go on.
Well, when it comes to colonialism at the time, on those ends where the product that enslaved Africans were producing, and then as well it's like also being product. In this case, it would be by destroying livestock, you'd be losing value in that case, and so it'd be to harm the master's finances. It'd be to something.
Yeah, because the individuals for that particular master would probably want to kill their livestock and then just as their act of resistance. And then another breaking of tools, individual, yeah. And then permanent marronage, I've talked about it. The malingering. Anyone? Malingering? Individual, yeah, individual. And then gossip or talking back to their owners. Yeah. Homicide.
Individual.
The homicide. That's or murder.
That was considered collective.
Yeah, because my sense is that it was viewed as something that maybe just one black slave may not be able to organize effectively. So a collective action may be needed to implement it or execute it effectively. That's my sense.
But I also so homicide in this case would be from enslaved Africans in this.
Yes, where they organize to kill their slave owners.
I think it was Turner Nat Brown or something. He was a white man who ended up killing a bunch of slave masters on the plane. In order to free a lot of enslaved Africans.
Yeah. And when you're talking about this, the black themselves, when they were the ones that did kill the whites as an act of resistance. And then armed rebellion, we talked about that. And then destruction of movable property is individual. Sure. So I also itemized them here. Yeah. So we have the for individual acts, we are temporal marronage, work stoppage, malingering, destruction of livestock, breaking of tools, gossip or that's talking back to their owners, and destruction of movable property. And then the collective, there were arson, revolts, permanent marronage, homicide, and armed rebellions. Yeah. And then one of the important things that I also saw from the readings was about why, how did, what situations or factors created the the opportunities for resistance, trying to understand, yeah, for there to be resistance, that means there were some enabling factors that allowed the resistance to occur. Because if they did not have that enabling environment or enabling situation or circumstances, these black enslaved individuals or groups wouldn't have been able to resist or muster the courage to resist. So some of these enabling factors were from the Bell's paper. I pointed out, yeah, they were in the low country, Georgia. That's where, because that paper was focused on that particular context, trying to understand why. So trying to understand why the why these enslaved individuals were able to resist in different ways, both trying to assert their identity, at times trying to muster courage to resist in an overt way, but for the most part, is trying to assert themselves, trying to retain and preserve their culture or their identity, their heritage, both their language and their traditions, and even their modes of cultivation or agriculture. So there are some of the enabling factors where that were noted in the paper included the high concentration of blacks in that particular region. So there were the black slaves to white population, the ratio was high because there was a high percentage of blacks in that setting. And then even after the abolition of slavery within the 1807 and 1808, they were still bringing in more. Kemi, can you mute yours, sir? Yeah, thank you. Because of the feedback. And then another is the separation of black. So there were in the islands, the blacks were also concentrated largely in the island, whereas whites were separated had their own concentration in the mainland. So that ability for them to congregate, for the blacks, a large population of blacks to congregate in the land or in the space, offered the opportunity for them to associate, for them to relate, for them to bond, for them to do things together, for them to interact, and for them to muster a front for resistance, including preserving their culture, even their languages, etc. So that's collection of ability for a large number of black enslaved individuals to congregate in these islands was an important factor that was noted. And then another is about the linguistic component. They developed a language which was described as a shared language, described as called Gula Ogechi. I hope I pronounced that well. Language, which was like a common language, was like an adulteration of the English and with African infusion of English and African language, which was a common means of communication, a shared language that the blacks in this setting were able to use to communicate. So language was an important uniting factor. It was an important tool for them to assemble, for them to plan, for them to work together, for them to retain their heritage and their identity, even infusing their traditional words and into this English language. So it was a way for them to like, oh, there's, for instance, there is something like fufu has become Anglican, what was the word, Anglicanized, or I forgot how, like making it English, uh, anglicized, right? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so fufu, but fufu is not originally an English word, and the same applies to some other words. So in the same way, some words we are borrowed from the African languages and then infused into the English language and commonized and shared in in that setting by the blacks. So these are ways to retain their identity, have a common language for communication and for collective action and activities. And then another is about religion also. Religion was also another important factor because they were also, some of them were able to retain their Islamic practices. Some were able to fuse Christianity and African religious practices and belief system. And that's also another enabling factor. Religion, we know, is a very powerful tool, very, very powerful tool, because it forms our belief system, it forms our orientation, it forms our morality as well. It forms what we believe to be, how we want to do things, how we believe in the creator, or for anyone who is religious and or whatnot. And then another aspect is about maintaining the same cohort of so some persons that were brought from Africa, the same cohorts from the slave ship were also settled in the same, some of them were settled in the same location. So these are people that began to develop that camaraderie, develop that bond and that friendship, and developed a level of kinship amongst themselves. So those from that identity, right from the their migration from Africa to the Americas, they were that kinship that they've developed, that bond that they've developed, you're able to maintain it. And in the same way, these same individuals being settled in the same location, they were able to they know themselves, they were able to communicate and preserve their identity to the best of their ability. And then, and even for instance, even for them to, some were also able to escape collectively. And another one is about confinement to the same space, even during the Middle Passage. This example about some persons that were kept, some slaves kept below deck, how they were able to resist, caused uproar. Some of them had even jumped into the sea, and about 12 were identified as Igbo that died in the process. They would rather die than, they saw that as freedom. So they would rather die than go into slavery. So that was like an exit. That was their way of resisting. Instead of going through this humiliation, they would rather die. So that's how they resisted by paying with their life. And then another is about the presence of a leader or a champion. So we also noted about the example of the Asian Revolution of 1791, where the priest Bookman, or his name, how he was able to, as a leader figure, he was able to rally people around, motivate them, and charge them to go and fight for their rights, fight for their freedom. So having that leader figure is something that is very instrumental. And even there's in the research, there's one of this research that I was involved in, one of my published works, although it's not in Black population, it's about the how some primary care practices were developed, some primary care team-based practices that aren't part of the formal family health team structure, or how some practice or clinic leaders were able to develop their own interprofessional team-based practices. So the importance of a champion or someone that is able to champion the cause, who is well connected or has some leadership role or have some influence, being able to champion the cause, rally people around, um, trying to mobilize resources and get things done. But in this case, it's about someone like the priest. We know the importance of a priest. The priest is an influential figure. A priest is often an influential figure, and the priest is often someone who people respect. They are able to bring people together. People listen to or many priests. Many people listen to their priests for even when there are directives, when there are things that needed to be done. They can be community organizers. So in this case, the priest whose name was noted as Bookman was the one who spurred them, who charged them to go on and carry on the revolution. So these are some of the enabling factors that I was able to sift out from the papers that were influential in the Black enslaved people's ability to resist. And then, okay, go on.
I think you could have also maybe added about the differences with like the deities and how the deities kind of inspired a little bit more of that individual resistance too.
Okay, yeah, I'll still get to the religious, yeah, I'll still get to that. But that I treated that as a separate, yeah. Yeah, so the resistance also, but yeah, talking about the resistance, there are some methods apart from the enabling factors. There were some strategies, actual strategies and methods that were used, examples of acts of resistance, which included artistic expressions like use of metaphors. For instance, we read some of the poetry works or poems where ocean was connoted, or connoted, there was this connotation of ocean as freedom. We know also how some persons drown in the ocean as they felt that as their freedom. They would rather die a free person than going into slavery. And some persons also saw it as, yeah, the ability to migrate back to Africa through the ocean as also a symbolic of freedom. Then another is about music also. They also sang, they using music to try to tell their stories, try to encourage themselves. It was also something of solace, a way to also encourage themselves, help them to remember their roots, help them to keep going. So music was also a very powerful tool. And then another one is about blending or syncretization of African and English words, or language like the Gula and Gichi that I pointed out in the linguistic enabling factor. And then there are also the instances of building home, those who were able to settle because some were able to escape and get their own settlements, whereas some also got paid off and became free. So some of them were in the Black settlements, also built structures or homes that also maintained the architecture that was the kind of architecture that was used in West Africa or maybe some other Africa, although they mentioned West Africa. But I believe the same would also apply to other parts of Africa, nonetheless. So that is something that I was used like, oh, we want to retain our heritage, want to preserve our heritage, want to preserve our identity. And we all use these things to maintain who we are, to maintain our identity. So then we also know the example of about preserving the African agricultural techniques, like in the in the low country, Georgia, where the women, their rice mills, the rice milling approaches and rice cultivation approaches were they took it the way they did plant they cultivated rice and milled rice. They also applied the same approaches in the low country, Georgia. And then another aspect is preserving their cultural identity via their names. Some persons resisted, some people were given names and they resisted. They wanted to, despite the name given to them, they still wanted to retain their African name, like the case of Kunta Kinte that I will also talk about shortly. And then they also wanted to, they also tried as much as possible to preserve their language, their traditions, their spirituality. Some of them came in practicing Islam. So because Islam has been long was has been Islam came into Africa before Christianity, at least that part of Africa, based on the reading that we had. So they had that Islam, they wanted to maintain their Islamic practices. They also wanted to maintain their Christian practices, which they also blended with the with Christianity. And then as I will also talk about subsequently about how some eventually try to change some Christian use some find like the equivalence of some Christian figures with the African traditional examples as well. And then there were also very importantly I saw it's about giving their children their tribal marks. I think that one was also very instructive, and I think that's very effective because, for instance, some tribal marks, some people can trace, oh, because these tribal marks will be peculiar to people from this particular setting. They say this traditional or ethnic groups have a particular tribal mark. So if they gave their child the tribal mark, it is easier for the child to know, yeah. And if assuming the family from one generation to the other, they continue to pass on the tribal marks, it would be easier for them to trace their roots beyond just the current day DNA test that we do to trace ancestry. And then storytelling was also a very powerful tool, which was used. Oral accounts were used to pass on information from one generation to the other. Then, obviously, some eventually tried to escape the plantation. There was also some people trying to flee back to Africa, and then some, like I talked about before, some also drown themselves in the sea or in the ocean. They would rather die in transit than allow themselves to be enslaved in America, or whether it's North America or South America. And if you also did further research, you would have known that the percentage of the more Africans we are taken to South America and the Caribbean than North America. The large proportion were sent to plantations in South America and the Caribbean, and then fewer to North America. Yeah. Does anyone have any question before I go on? Okay, yeah. So there was also the gender aspect to this resistance during this era. During this period, transatlantic slave era, there was also a gender lens to it, where especially women have their peculiar experiences. One of the things I think was also instructive and worth highlighting is about the children of slave. It was as if there was this matrilineal ways to identity, where any person born to a slave mother, a slave woman, also took on that slave identity until they became free. Maybe they bought themselves, or slavery was eventually abolished. But it was as if there was this matrilineal way of identifying slave babies, of slave children. And then women were also prone to severe violence from from the slaveholders for sure. And that was unfortunately part of the experiences of women. And some were also overworked, beaten, some were brutalized, hanged, and murdered. So that was the experience of some women. Like the example of the Chloe Cooley by the paper by, that's the Cooper paper, talked about Chloe Cooley. So obviously she resisted, and for the owner to want to sell her, it means that was, although it was inferred, but it's easy to note, the author inferred that, yeah, she must have been disobedient, giving the owner a lot of issues, a lot of trouble that made him to want to sell her. And eventually she was sold. She was bound. She was bound and then put into boats. And yeah, she still screamed and resisted and shouted. And that was the little way that she could resist. So that's why, like the interventions I had here about using their women often tend to use their voice to resist. They were also the women also adopted the approach of also trying to control their reproduction, not their fertility approaches, in a bid not to give to produce any offspring from their owner. And then some of them also went to the extent of committing infanticide, that's killing their little babies. And then some also chose abstinence for those who were able to. And then finally, women also, because of their involvement in domestic activities, they were very much involved in the domestic aspect of the works, apart from the field works. But when it comes to domestic activities, women were active. That was where they were so much involved in as well. So some of them also could also poison their the slaveholder. So then, talking about resistance from the more spiritual, and does anyone have any question before I go forward? Okay, from the more spiritual aspect, that's when we talk about the Anansi, Leba, issue, deities. So these were deities that are associated with trickery. They were associated with also being trying to they were trying to go against the tides. So they were like deities that are known to trying to resist authority, trying to they are dissidents. So, however, they were also known with deception. They were also known as people who were at the deities that were at the crossroads or the point of transition between the physical or the human and the human realm and the spiritual or God's realm. So these were some of their qualities, but one of the important things, apart from being a source of encouragement or succor for the black slaves, is that they also learned trickery to be impotent to the act of deception as part of the things that they gleaned and learned from these deities and eventually applied. So for instance, part of the inspirations that they drew from the deities is about yeah, we know our power, we know what we can do, which is we don't have the tools for correction or for violence. We know the slave owners have the tools for correction or for violence. However, what we can utilize most often is the everyday acts of resistance, like that aspect of trick, that aspect of deception. And I lifted this quote also, which is quite, yeah, from a broken or pidgin way of, well, I think from Marshall's paper, we talked about that that the whites, that they have schemes, but the niggers themselves had the tricks. Like that every time that the Booker Buckra schemed once, that the blacks or the slaves schemed twice. That means they try to be as much as possible ahead. They try to be ahead of the slave owners by using acts of deception, maybe feigning ill, even trying to maybe someone else, assuming another slave was not doing their work, they may want to step in to try to encourage that person. But they themselves, the person trying to encourage the other person to work, would eventually not do their own work. And that was a sort of strategy that they used yeah, eventually there will be there will be lapses eventually. But that's a sort of tool that they used, trying to intervene. But the person intervening for the other person to work isn't also would end up not doing their own work. And so it created a lot of inefficiencies and also losses, economic losses, including the way they also spoiled the equipment, tried to feign laziness, feign illness, and other things that they did. So these were some of the tricks that they used in a bid to beat the slave owners at their work, at, at their game. And then some of the other skills include lying, stealing, obviously cheating, even what I described also fits into the cheating category. Working slowly, self-mutilation. In order to not to work, they might injure themselves, maybe cut out a limb. Or those part of their punishment was also, for instance, those that escaped and were brought back or were captured and brought back, they may lose a limb or maybe a finger or a toe, although these are part of the punishment that they experienced. But at times they themselves also may injure themselves or mutilate their body so that they will not work efficiently or at full capacity for the slaveholders. What is this one?
I was gonna say I really like this. I think it's one of my favorite readings because my mom, my first cousins, like in Jamaica, they talk about, well, they say brother Anansi is what they say. And like I know some like a lot of the stories that they have about like brother Anansi being, tricking like the tiger and whatever. So
Yeah.
I didn't really understand like I guess the history of these stories. And I know all the like in Jamaica or I guess in the Caribbean. And I know like brother Anansi, like it's kind of transitive and like other places in the world too, like the Netherlands and all that. But I know that the meaning kind of changed. Or I guess the Nancy, the meaning kind of changed like over in the Caribbean. But yeah, which is nice to see how like an actual like just to see like
the origin and how things have evolved over time. Yeah. Yeah, you want to say something?
Any like questions kind of on your hotels?
Yeah.
Americans.
Yeah, I think it was also interesting to learn about Nancy from the Ashanti or for Anka group, and then the Leba from the Fon group, whereas the issue is from Yoruba. So it's really nice to learn about the origins and how it's even the meaning and even the potency. At times, even the Leba became Papa Leba because they've almost like emasculated Leba, made it so impotent and so it was also nice to also learn that there were also that they also developed new equivalents. Or, yeah, we know that Lebwa has lost their X vigor and vitality, but they developed the GERD, I think the GHEDE, and the GERD, I don't know the pronunciation, and then the Carrefour for something like that. So, so they also tried to develop the voodoo priests and voodoo worshippers also tried to develop another figure that by themselves that would at least make up for what the Lebra had lost. So I think that is very, very interesting for sure. Do you want to say something?
I was thinking though, because like me, for example, and I asked my first cousins to like, what like the issue behind the stories, and they didn't really know. I didn't know. They didn't really know like the origin of brother Nancy. And I started thinking about resistance in terms like when does resistance end? Because say for example, like these folk tales and stuff, if they may lose their original meanings over time, is that still considered like resistance or like what?
Yeah, do you have an answer? Yes.
No, he wasn't true, so I don't think it would be this kind of like good or inspirational like that brother. So I think whatever the hotel needs to be to help the people survive is what. I don't think that-
Yeah,
He said that the folk tales are very valuable in regards to.
Yeah.
Surrounding contexts.
exactly. Yeah, because they have that the Anansi, the some a god that is trying to just be mischievous and trying to disobey and use tricks and all or whatnot. I think the equivalent, the main god is Nyame, something like that, right? Yeah. So but all these things are even like where I come from. We also have our the Igbo part of the Nigeria. We have also have our folk tales and all. Well, not even animals like tortoise is believed to be so cunning and. But we know this is just tortoise. We see tortoise. These things are just figurative, and they are not what, in actual sense, they are not what they are framed to be. But it's just things that are used to inspire. They are used to encourage. They are used to pass on messages. They are just devices. That's how to say it. So the Anansi on its own obviously does not have the power. So these are just ascribed. We ascribe the power and the whole actions or abilities to them. So that's what it is. So nevertheless, even when for instance Legba was losing its vitality in the way they described it, they still developed alternative, potent, like strong or effective, perceived effective alternatives like the Gather and the Carrefour. I don't know whether that's the pronunciation anyway. Yeah, but I believe you know that's Carerefour. Yeah. So that's these are just devices. These are just they are just figurative, but also spiritual because they had spiritual meanings and implications. Yeah. So, and then also, I also had this also interesting aspect about how the practice of voodoo, although it was banned within 8 days of of a slave entering Haiti, the French actually banned them from practicing their traditional religion, and they were baptized and turned into Christians. So they lost that autonomy to practice their religion, and they had to take on the Christian religion. So, however, they were also smart and also they were also creative. They found the equivalent of these Christian figures for the traditional from the traditional religion. For instance, the deity Legba was syncretized with Saint Michael, who we know as the commander of the army of God in Christianity, the prince of the archangels, all those stuff from the Bible. And then also as well as Saint Peter, who holds the key of heaven. And then another important thing is also about the ceremony, the West African non-Catholic symbols, like the cross. The cross was also, they found the equivalent for the cross with the African religion, where like the crossroad, the labor position between the axis of the world of humans and gods. So that's believing that the cross has its root from African religion. Yeah, it's not truly Christian in the way they framed it. So there's this, I've forgotten what this cross is called. I forgot to check it out before today's class. I wanted to do that. I forgot. There's this cross that I forgot. There's a name it's called. It has like like somewhat secular here, up here, and then I've forgotten, there's a name, but I've forgotten. I don't know if anyone remembers what the cross is called. That has like a secular stuff like this, and then before the
Is that what you're talking about? Yeah,
maybe I've forgotten. You might be right.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah, yeah, but it has its root from the African religion, but it's still
Yeah, the ankh.
Oh, yeah, that's Egyptian.
yeah Egyptian, yeah, which is African. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's its roots. So, but it's been highly Christianized as well and used in Christian religion. So, and also some of these things were also modified into to have its Christian equivalent. So, because initially, based on what I learned from others and research, that the that was the original shape of the cross, that the cross that we know that has this one that like the cardinal signs, north, south, west and east. Now before it was that's one that you mentioned right now. Forgotten what you call it. What do you call it again? Ankh. Yeah, exactly. So that was the initial original cross before this adaptation. Yeah. So that's how things have actually that's so they were able to find the equivalent of this, like, oh, this the cross was actually represented Lebra's rule as being at the crossroad from the human between the human and the humans and gods. So these are interesting ways of creatively adapting the what is applicable in the in this in the religious set in the traditional religion together with the Christian religion. So yeah, so I have this I from the Anansi Anansi tactics or style. So these lying, stealing, cheating, walking slowly, self-mutilation, willfully misunderstanding instructions, breaking tools and machinery, as well as setting fire to the fields before harvest time. So I want you to use the ABC framework to categorize or sort this. Yeah, on lying, where would lying fall under? Sorry, avoidance. Okay, correct.
It's like resistant. I guess it depends on the context. Couldn't lying also be like directly resistant?
Yeah, lying, yeah, because resistance is not only the overt and covert, it could be trying not to do, assuming you are told to do something and you just want to do something else and you can lie, yeah, just use an excuse to cover up. Well, that's you just lie because you didn't say the truth. So, but they did utilize it as a tool for resistance during the Transatlantic Slave Era. So yeah, it's obviously the avoidance or hybrid strategy. And then stealing, breaking, yeah. Yeah, but I think there's a nuance. It depends on what kind of stealing, for sure, because some stealing may be an individual act, which may not be something so consequential, but it may be more coordinated and more some like breaking is about something like public confrontation. Just like protest, you create a lot of saying, it's organized, more than one person is doing it. So that's a way for you to understand the breaking resistance. So yes, stealing can, assuming it's a well coordinated stealing by more persons, yeah, it could be breaking.
But if it was an individual,
Yeah,
would that still be breaking?
no, it will be avoidance. Yeah. So I just want you can still go back to the definitions just to help you appreciate.
Oh, I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. I'll post this slide. So today, yeah. I didn't post because I was still trying to update it since I didn't finish last time, but I'll post it this time around. And then cheating. Yeah, bro. Walking slowly. This one it isn't. Avoidance, yeah. Self-mutilation. Why is it breaking?
Yeah,
I would take break.
Okay, yeah, it's nice to hear that rationale. That's very important.
Damaging property. In this case, and that would be part of collective resistance.
Okay, you want to say something, but let me go back so I don't just why I repeat them, but you also understand. So this avoidance is a resistance that is quiet and seemingly invisible, common behavior, subordinate group, blah blah blah, tools and strategies for resistance. Yeah, then breaking is about resistance that publicly challenges power directly by disobedience, non-cooperation, and interventions. So yeah. So you can also see some of the examples here. And then constructive is just about creating alternatives to the mainstream system. Yeah. So
So it's not a subtle way of protest, it's a very public way of protest. That is challenging the power, and it's first, a non-cooperative ways.
Yeah.
That's why I would say that it's great.
yeah, okay, yeah, I agree. It's breaking for sure. But it's good that we understand the ground, or have that proper understanding of what breaking is and what avoidance or everyday is. Yeah, it's breaking for sure, but because it's overt. And for instance, and this example of self immolation, this that's when someone sets fire on themselves during the what led to the Arab, what is this called? Arab Spring. Yeah, Arab Spring, when Mohammed Bouazizi set himself on fire. Yeah, so that's what a fruit seller felt that he was harassed, couldn't sell his goods. The tax force people were harassing him. He felt frustrated. I don't know the other aspect of the whole story, what might have caused. Maybe there might be some other things that led that made that that level of frustration turning into such graduating into such acts where he set himself on fire, and eventually people started rioting, and some not African countries lost the regimes were toppled eventually. So that's an overt act of resistance. So self-immolation could be breaking. Then willfully misunderstanding instruction would be which one?
Avoidance.
True. Breaking tools and machinery.
Avoidance.
Yeah, avoidance, because you can argue, yeah, it was a mistake. Yeah, I broke down two broke down, but it was a mistake. So it's avoidance. And then setting fire to the fields before harvest time. Yeah, especially if they know that the slaves organized and did set the field on fire. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about this. Did you guys watch? Okay.
I did find this.
You didn't find which one? How did you find it?
I watched it from my memory. Maybe that. So
It's a series, and
Yeah.
it's under a paywall.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't provide a free access.
But there is some YouTube reviews about.
Yeah, yes, I watched that one as well.
Series.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll send it like, I don't know, archive.org. That's all that.
Really?
It's a documentary.
yeah, like
It's a TV series, mini series. Yeah, 8 episodes. Yeah. Yeah. So you may want to watch it. You said archive.org.
Archive.org.
Oh, okay. Nice. All right. So, but basically, I didn't know there was a way to get a free access one. So, all right. So it's about the story of a young African boy, or should I say young man, with the name Kunta Kinte, from the Mandinka group of present day Gambia in Africa, West Africa. So he was on his way to fetch firewood, he was captured by slave merchants and was sold to slavery and eventually found himself in America. So, but however, he he was given a name by the slave owners, which was Toby, and he resisted. He refused to accept the name. He tried to maintain his language. He tried to hold on to himself, the memories from back home, retain his identity, retain his language. Like eventually, he also passed the language and the name through storytelling. It ensured that his daughter, Kizzy, knew who she was, where her father came from, her father's name, and also the same name. The name was eventually passed on to subsequent generations. Kizzy passed the name to about, oh, you are from Mandinka people of Africa. Your father is your father is telling the Joy knew that, yeah, your grandfather was Kunta Kinte. This is where he's from. Also try to ensure that they know at least some words from from the Mandinka language. Some words were passed on. Some of the memories were also passed on from one generation to the other. So and this was achieved through storytelling. So that oral history was passed on from one generation to the other. And that's how they did resist. And that's how the family, unlike many, unfortunately, because of how the slaveholders would try to erase the identity of many Black individuals or Black peoples, at least the Kunta Kinte lineage still retained their identity. They know where they came from. They know who their progenitor was. They know his name. They know about him, and every single generation, from one generation to the other, knew the story and passed it on. Right from up to the time where George, which was then called Chicken George, because he knew he was good at training fowl or chicken for wrestling or animal chicken wrestling. He got the name Chicken George. So eventually he was able to, despite the whole thing, the whole my should I say migration and all whatnot that happened. There was a time we went to the Europe for the chicken wrestling competition and back to America, and but despite everything that happened, efforts to erase the identity, this particular family retained their identity. They retained their words. They know who their progenitor is. They knew they had all those identity, both the language, the name, the culture, the memories. This particular family was able to retain it. That's like the summary of the story of the Kunta Kinte. So I would want to ask, and if anyone also wanted to, there's a dimension to the story, Anna, if there's a dimension to the story that you also wanted to add, that would be fine too.
But even though my mom was like first generation, she won't beat it. Really, my YouTube on watching. Trying to show us how, like, even though she came straight from the continent, tried not to lose that lineage, that sense of connections.
Yeah.
I think in this case, there was active resistance, but I guess there was also like the punishment received with him losing his foot was kind of right. That's what happened. Like from what I remember, like he escaped once and then they cut off his foot, and then he tried to escape again, and they did it again. Yeah. So
it was really recalcitrant.
Yeah, the act of resistance there, or just leaving, but I can't remember what happened now.
Yeah, for sure. But that's the kind of heart and person he was. He never gave in. He never gave in. And one of them, apart from those overt and acts of resistance, that aspect of trying to tell the stories, ensuring that each generation has that story. And I believe he must have told I'm coming to you, Hannah. I know he must have told them to pass on the story from one generation to the other. So I think maintaining that tradition is something that is very powerful, very, very powerful. So Anna, you want to say something?
So my mom, I mean, wasn't taught about when she was born and raised, so like watching the story intergenerations also learning experience with her. Even though she was mixed with stuff, like living. So there's like a typical process.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I just had some questions like what lessons did we draw from the roots? And I also felt that folks would have watched it as well before coming. But yeah, but with what you know about it at the moment, what lessons maybe one or two, maybe let's say one lesson did you draw from the Kunta Kinte's story and the family roots? Okay, Shalom. Any other person? Thank you.
Well, I think the way the story starts showing, I think, starts off with him coming to terms with racism and whatnot, and then it goes back to wanting to know the roots. And so in both cases, it's just that resistance still, from then still persists in the activities that we need to do today. For example, like I know there's working on corporate jobs, like taking that extra 5 minutes, 10 minutes before time, at the end of work is like almost like an act of resistance. So taking extra 10 minutes on lunch like is part of like that active resistance, and not wanting your company to make billions of dollars so you can just be able to provide for your own family.
Yeah. Femi, yeah, go on.
It's important that we don't lose sight of who we are. It's a shame that these days, a lot of the things that are very particular to Africans are being forgotten. And I find that very concerning, one of which is our language, especially the Yoruba language. I think you are doing well with the Igbo language. That's what I have found. But the Yoruba language is becoming extinct, with even people in Nigeria not speaking the language. So I just find that an act of resistance will be keeping your culture, not losing sight of who you are and not becoming somebody else simply because.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that's a very valid point as well, because um, Kunta Kinte for sure tried to pass on the language from the Mandinka language to his child or daughter, and we also tried to pass it on to her son, George, and also George maintained the same pattern, or such that up to the 1940s, etc., and so on, they were still able to retain and tell the story. So, and then also know that, yeah, this language, we have a language from our progenitor, and we see they still know at least some words from that language. I think that's very powerful. Yeah, and I agree that language is something that is beginning, some African languages are beginning to gradually get extinct. Even the Igbo language, we from the Igbo side also argue that we're not doing so well compared to, let's say, the Hausas from the northern part of Nigeria. So, which I think they do better when it comes to preserving their language. So it's something that we should be proud of. I mean, our language, we should be proud of our language and try to utilize and speak it, ensure that our children, wherever they are in the world, that they're able to speak our language. And yeah, because I've also seen there is one I saw on Facebook, there's a particular family, a particular woman I saw on Facebook. She's married to a Canadian, I think somewhere in Saskatchewan. But she's married to a Canadian white, but their children speak, uh, yeah, I know, I think they call them Beke Igbo or something like that. The man, apart from the man the white man is trying to speak Igbo to the little person that he could, he's trying, honestly. But the children, especially the daughter, the first daughter, speaks Igbo very well. Probably better than many people back home in Nigeria. She speaks Igbo very well. And this is someone that was born and raised in Saskatchewan. So that's a good example of such in the present day, of how people can choose to retain, despite for her, even people who are married to fellow blacks, some of them, you see that their children can't speak the African language. And then even those in, let's say, Lagos, Nigeria, it's common there, where we see people from other parts of Nigeria, they live in Lagos, Nigeria, and they can't speak their local languages. Whereas someone who is also even married to a white speaks. And yeah, I wish I could share the content, but it's quite interesting. Yeah, you want to say something?
I guess like one of the lessons from hearing is like no matter what, nobody can take away who you are. And one of the like the third question, how do you resist? One thing that I think was something that's even active since now is like him keeping his name, right? So like resisting them calling him Toby.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you see even today is a lot of people anglicize their names because they're, you know, adapting to what they think is comfortable for other people. But I do think it's an act of resistance. Like even for me, some people like hear my name and they'll be like, "Oh, I'll just call you Sunny" or something like that. And I'm like, "No, you're gonna call me Sunshine. Like you're gonna call me my actual name." And I feel like that is a small act of resistance because you're not just sort of adapting to what is comfortable for like, you know, the mainstream white society. It's like you're gonna learn what my heritage is, and like a name is a big part of you.
Yeah.
So I think seeing that, just like those small acts of resistance, like maybe denying a nickname or sometimes it's hard to like with an authority figure correct them or, you know, resist in that way. But I do think that's like a small act of resistance that is really important and part of like keeping your culture or your language was like honoring it in that way. But
yeah. Yeah, thank you. So that's how you resisted would be to ensure that people call your name correctly, your full name. Yeah. Anyone else want to add something?
Well, to add on to that, yeah, because you know, there's always a saying like pronounce Tchaikovsky or something like that. You can pronounce anyone else's name too.
Yeah, I remember, although actually my English name anyway. Some persons call Augustine, and different ways. It's been called in different ways, and yeah, I remember someone telling me, yeah, please just ensure that they call your name correctly. So what's the correct pronunciation? Yeah, because it's very important. Although, unfortunately, I've used my English name more. Yeah, no, I've not been using my Igbo name, which is my tribal and local name that much. Chukwuebuka or Ebuka.
Ibuka?
Ebuka, yeah. Ebuka, yeah. It means God is great. Yeah. Yeah. So my English name has been the one that most people know me with, including friends. Yeah. But nonetheless, I think it's very important for us to begin to make our names the ones that be our identity known. It's very important. I know some friends then in secondary school or high school, you call it here. I know some friends that had they had two names apart from their last name for sure. They had two names, and those two names are their Igbo names. Even there are even some Yorubas that also do the same. They don't have English name. It's intentional. And I also know I see such practice often in the Anglican church in, let's say, back home for sure. I don't know about other places, but back home, most of my people that I know that do that are often people from the Anglican church, Anglican communion. So they try to utilize what we call baptismal name, which turn out to be for people like me that is Catholic. We utilize probably name of a saint or that kind of thing. But those folks, they often use their Igbo name to do both. And I also see some Yorubas that also do the same. Maybe I don't know much about the Hausas because I've not interacted with many of them, but I also suspect that many of them would do the same. They would probably use their own local And I know them, they do Islamic a lot, so maybe Islamic names. And some of these things happen because people want to ensure that the identity is preserved, is well preserved. So yeah, so this is 12:45. We have 15 minutes, but we can finish earlier than. So if does anyone have any question or anything whatsoever before we call it? I, I mean, related to what we discussed today, the readings and okay.
Question, but just since I haven't, sorry, I didn't realize Roots was like a TV show. I was looking for a reading, but it reminded me of something I saw. It was called like The Language You Cry In, and it was like a documentary about this woman. She was a descendant of enslaved Africans in America, and she had this song that she sang in a language she didn't know, but her grandmother taught it to her. And some researchers like went to different parts of Africa, and they found that it's a funeral song from this one specific tribe. Like it wasn't like a few of them, it was like one specific tribe. And she was able to go back and meet them. But if that wasn't passed on to her, like if her grandmother and her grandmother's forefathers didn't force that to be passed on, she would have never known.
Yeah.
I just think like what a blessing it would be to know like where your ancestors are from.
True.
But I think even with like if you don't know all the details, you can still pass on something to your children or your nieces and nephews that can be grounding.
Yeah, true. And that's correct, and it makes a lot of sense. I concur with what you said. I agree. Yeah. Yeah. Any other person? Because I'll stop the recording right now.